There's nothing to worry about in the dark. Only your imagination, my father said before slamming the heavy door, leaving me alone with the darkness of the basement. I screamed, begged to let me out, screamed hoarsely, tearing my voice, but in vain. He left me completely helpless, alone in the hopeless darkness, because he knew that I was afraid of this more than anything in the world. I sat for hours at the basement door, closing my eyes and hugging myself, swaying weakly, until despair took over my thoughts completely. And I really heard the sounds. Rustling, tapping and creaking. They drove me crazy. But they weren't even the scariest thing for me. When I was 4 years old and my mother was still alive, we often played monsters in the bathroom with her. She lathered my head and made all sorts of funny horns out of my hair. I looked at myself in the mirror, made a terrible face, and literally fell from laughter with my mother. Once while washing, my mother came out of the bathroom for a second to answer the phone, and I looked into the mirror and saw my reflection grinning maliciously, and suddenly began to change. The forehead stretched out, the horns lengthened, the skin turned pale, and the eyes took on a completely insane expression. I screamed in a voice not my own, slipped, plunged into the water, and almost drowned if my mother, who came running to my cry, hadn't pulled me out of the water in time. Terrified, I clung to her and cried, begging her to remove this bad mirror. In the evening, Dad took him to the basement, and there were never any mirrors in the bathroom anymore. And now, sitting in the dark and knowing how close it was to me, I felt that someone was looking at me. An hour, another, I don't remember how much time passed before the basement door opened, letting in the saving light. Once I had to sit there until morning. Probably only a faint saved me from insanity. With the death of my mother, my father began to drink heavily. I was 8, and he decided to make a real man out of me. "The most important thing, son," he said, showering me with a warm alcoholic wave. "A man should not be afraid of anything. You're a weakling, but I'll teach you this simple truth." Since then, my life has turned into torture. The fear of going home, doing something wrong, not pleasing his father, all this was considered by them as a weakness. He would get up from his chair, grab my hand, and drag me into the basement, screaming and struggling, and each time he closed the door with the same caring smile. "It's all for your own good. Be a real man and conquer your fear." The rasp of the key in the keyhole, the retreating footsteps, and I felt like a rabbit trapped again. Until one day I found no other way out than to start going down the stairs. In the pitch darkness, I groped my way, guided only by the shelves running along the walls of the basement. I calculated the number of steps leading to the old generator and took it as a reference point, moving in the intended direction of the small window. If only, I thought, I could open it a crack to let in the light. But my hands only came across a solid wall. Then I began to move along it, until suddenly I bumped into something that reached up to my waist. Mirror. That mirror. I rushed to the generator, tripping over some cable on the way and almost sprawling on the floor. I scrambled up the stairs on all fours and started banging furiously on the door. To no avail. My father must have been fast asleep at that moment. I sank down exhausted on the step and took several deep breaths, listening to what was happening below. The silence was broken only by my own heartbeats, and it seemed to me that I could distinguish some kind of soft sound, like claws being dragged across glass. A few hours later, the door opened. I made my way to my room and took a small flashlight out of the drawer. Then he opened the closet and pulled out an old bedspread from the stack. Wrapping a flashlight in it, I took this equipment downstairs and put it right next to the basement door. The key was not there. My father always kept it with him, probably afraid that I would make a duplicate. I took out a flashlight and stuffed it in the back pocket of my jeans and pushed the blanket with the toe of my shoe under the closet next to it. The next time I came out of the basement, I intended to drag him inside. Now I had to wait for the next time and test my theory. My father met my expectations by getting drunk in Indravidan a week later and blaming the burnt omelet on me. For the first time in my life, I felt the anticipation of my punishment. Once in the dark, I immediately took the batteries I had stored in advance out of my front pockets and put them on the shelf on the left, in reserve. Then he turned on the flashlight and examined the walls. In some places, the lime had fallen off in whole pieces, cracks, wide and thick like snakes, went up somewhere. The shelves I was guided by turned out to be littered with all sorts of small things. After rummaging through them thoroughly, I found a box of gunpowder, wax candles, and a small cartridge case. There were no matches, and for sure they would have been damp here long ago. But the gunpowder gave me an idea. Going down to the bottom of the stairs, I examined the basement itself. The ceilings were low, but still taller than me. But I was wrong about the window. it was on a completely different side than I expected, plastered with mud just enough that not a single ray of sunlight would pass through it. I would have thought that my father did it on purpose to not give me a single opportunity to cling to salvation, if I wasn't sure that he wouldn't have had enough imagination for such a thing. Suddenly, a crackling sound was heard from the opposite corner. I immediately directed the beam there and saw that the mirror was turned in my direction. Trying not to panic, I walked up to him and squatted down, examining the beautiful frame. There were even a few drops of toothpaste frozen in the bottom corner, since someone, probably his father, had last brushed his teeth in front of him. But something was wrong, and I realized that only when I ran my hand across the floor. There was a thick layer of dust on everything in the basement, and there was not a speck of dust on the shiny surface, as if it had just been brought here. A ripple suddenly ran across the smooth glass, and I jumped back, looking for some rag to cover the mirror. The beam of the flashlight was now visibly shaking in my hands, while I was frantically rummaging through some large bags, and meanwhile a screeching sound was clearly heard behind my back. It was like it was greeting me. Finally, I managed to extract some ragged rags from the bag, and, turning around, quickly threw it on the mirror. The beam of the flashlight was now looking somewhere into the wall, while I was slowly approaching a piece of reflection visible through a hole in the fabric. The light suddenly wavered, and instead of my pupil, a black eye full of madness was looking at me from the reflection. Screaming loudly, I crawled backwards, pushing with my hands and feet, until my back hit the base of the stairs. The step bumped into my shoulder, but I didn't even feel any pain climbing up. When I got to the door, I quickly turned around, ready to see the monster crawling up the stairs, but there was no one at the bottom of it. Only the sound remained from the depths of the basement, some kind of inhuman muttering and grinding. The lantern was still shining steadily, and the light calmed him. I even managed to take a nap for a few minutes. When my father let me out, I distracted his attention for a second with an empty question, quickly groping for the edge of the blanket and dragging it into the gap between the basement wall and the door. Returning to the room, I sat down at the table and began to draw. When the picture was ready, I made another one and another, until the image reflected on each of them acquired clear and terribly precise features. I hid the picture in a drawer, and I went to the shopping complex on the next street. There I bought 12 packs of gunpowder from the same company as the gunpowder in the basement. I can say that I was lucky that the cashier was so tired that she hardly noticed who and how she was serving. If she had remembered me, it could have gotten me into a lot of trouble. At home, I put the boxes under the closet near the basement. There was the last part of the plan, on which I did all the calculation. The window on the outside of the house was as unsightly as on the basement side. I had to tinker to be able to open it a little, but in the end I succeeded. Only after returning everything to its previous position, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. The screwdriver in the back pocket of my jeans gave me a kind of grim determination. Already falling into a restless sleep, I suddenly realized how difficult the task was facing me. But with the onset of morning, I felt that everything would work out. It was my birthday, damn it, on days like this, you just had to be lucky. My father had been drunk, it seemed, since the night before, but by some miracle he was still on his feet. He certainly did not forget what day it was, so after a long stammering speech, instead of a gift, he said that now, as a real man, I must prove my courage. In other words, he was going to lock me in the basement for a day. The old pervert knew that there was a mirror there. He never forgot about it. And looking at his greasy face as he led me in a familiar direction, I felt hatred mixed with satisfaction. In a few minutes, he will receive a wonderful surprise. He had never dreamed of such a thing. The water from the tap, which I turned on in the morning, seems to have already overflowed over the edge of the sink. I almost urged my father on while he unlocked the basement. Once in the dark, I turned on the flashlight, went down to the generator and checked the tank. It turned out to be complete. The beginning was laid. I got up again, grabbed a pack of gunpowder, tore it up, and made a smooth powder path from the third step to the generator tank. When I was shaking out the remaining grains, a real roar was heard from the side of the mirror. My monster was waking up. I took the screwdriver out of my pocket and, running past the mirror, found myself at the water pipe. Squeezing the handle, I hit the metal surface as hard as I could. The rusty metal gave way, and a stream ran out of the hole, weak, but certainly noticeable. Looking back at the mirror for the last time, I saw that the fabric had already slipped half, and part of the reflection was filled with a familiar face from my picture. He knew what I was up to, and he was smiling with long, sharp teeth. I rushed to the door again and shouted with all my might. All my manipulations took no more than 5 minutes. My father was probably still in the kitchen. I knew that my father was most afraid of water. His own father drowned when he was still a child. He reacted immediately to the word flood. I heard his heavy tread shuffle in the direction of the bathroom, where, judging by the cry, he saw exactly what he most feared, and darted down as soon as the steps turned in my direction. In a second, I tore the cloth from the mirror, feeling the floor tremble under my feet. The demon in the reflection just rejoiced. A click, hurried footsteps on the stairs, a long-awaited shout. "Where's the damn pipe?" I memorized my route before I extinguished the lantern. The father did not think to take anything with him, lighting the way along the stairs with an open door. However, once at the bottom, he somewhat slowed down his pace. "Son, where are you?" "Here," I replied from the side where the broken pipe flowed. The sound of dripping water oriented my father, giving me time to slip by his side and rush to the exit. As I slammed the door behind me, I heard my father cursing and climbing the stairs. A second later, he collapsed with all his weight on the door, and if it wasn't for the blanket, which I used as a lock, tucking it tightly under the door jamb, my venture would have come to an end. The father continued to knock from the inside and demand to be released. Suddenly, there was a loud crack below. The blows stopped, and the frightened voice of the father was heard from behind the door. "What is it?" "I don't know." I was surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "Come down and take a look." "Oh, you brat. Have you forgotten what you taught me?" I heard my father coming down slowly. When he saw, I don't know, maybe he didn't see it, but he felt it for sure. Two screams rang out in the deathly silence of the house, desperate and triumphant. "There's nothing to worry about in the dark, just my imagination," I finished and laughed. Grabbing the prepared packs of gunpowder, I took out a lighter and turned the wheel. The homemade fuse lit up on the first attempt. I had only a few seconds left. Pulling the door handle, I felt the skin on my palm peel off. The door opened, the eerie sounds of tearing flesh below seemed deafening to me. I threw the bundles towards the generator, leaving the only one with a wick on the third step. The water, according to my calculations, should have already been approaching the base of the mirror. Closing the door, I rushed out of the house and flew down the stairs upside down when the explosion occurred. On my knees, I crawled up to the dormer window and kicked it several times. A jet of air rushed in, intensifying the fire, and at the moment when I was already crawling back, red, scab-covered hands burst out of the fiery flame and grabbed me by the ankle. I screamed, trying to shake them off, and meanwhile, yellow eyes flashed in the doorway. The insane expression seemed to hypnotize me, and I realized this is the end. But suddenly, there were a few more soft explosions, probably my boxes of gunpowder, and I managed to escape. I crawled away to a great distance and turned around again. Only flashes of fire were visible through the window. Neighbors were already running to the house from all sides. A fire siren could be heard somewhere in the distance, or maybe it just seemed that way to me. I closed my eyes and fainted. I woke up in the hospital the next day. I vaguely remember some people asking me about the fire, about my father. I told them that I was in the kitchen when the explosion occurred, and quickly ran out of the house. I don't know if they believed me or not, but in the end, everyone left the poor 13-year-old boy alone. And a week later, the lawyer came. He showed me his mother's will, according to which all the money she had saved for me was waiting for the moment when I would come of age. If I hadn't lived to see this day, the lawyer explained to me, the money would have gone to my father. I visited the ruins of the former house many months later, and I was even able to go down to the basement. He had completely burned out, and now he did not conceal anything terrible for me. Only the mirror disappeared. It didn't burn down. It didn't break. It just disappeared. I wouldn't be surprised if it is now hanging in the house of one of the experts who dealt with this case, in a beautiful frame, pure and silver. Maybe it will kill its new owner, or maybe, like me, it will help me to escape. I don't care. I just don't want to know what it is anymore. Darkness, basement, and mirror.